Hey, everybody. Welcome to Moment of Clarity. Hope you're doing well out there. Please take a second to share this. Let people know. Thank you for joining me. Thanks for being a part of fighting back against the shitheads, to put it succinctly. I'm also live on Rockfin, I believe, or will be any second. And yeah. Hey, Teddy. Hey, everybody. Hey, Elias. Thanks for being here. As I always mention, first of all, I have some great news stories for you, but I also have a great guest. I believe will be here, named Jen Deerenwater. She's a journalist, a reporter, a great writer, also multi-talented, and has a big event, or is part of a big event coming up soon, which I'll be getting into in a moment. But I also have news on the Biden administration admitting that they tell Facebook what to censor, which sounds just fucking perfect. And more news on Cuba. So I'll be getting to all that. But as I say, everyone, on each of these, the donations in the super chat all go to people who are struggling. And we read some of the thank yous. We get into more detail about it on the weekend live stream. All the donations on Rockfin go to people who are struggling. All the donations on Venmo at Lee Camp, you can donate on Venmo, go to people who need a leg up, need a little help. If that is you, email commoncensored@protonmail.com if you're having a really rough time, and a few bucks will be a big help to you. It's not billions of dollars that will send you, although who knows, maybe you'll have a good poker hand and you'll turn it into $1 billion, but it'll be, we're averaging around $80 for people. And yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks again. So let's get into it. By the way, New Redacted Tonight comes out, or is already out, I believe, where I talk with Jill Stein about Julian Assange. But I want to get to a story here before I bring on Jen Deerenwater. And that is this video. This is straight from Obama's own press secretary. Obama. I mean, what's the fucking difference? Biden's own press secretary. It's not like Biden knows he's president, so I can call him Obama. He wouldn't. Would he catch it? Would he really be like, that's not my name? Probably not. So Biden's own press secretary in this video. Now, I got to warn you, this video has been posted by the Daily Caller. Daily Caller, total piece of shit, awful outlet, just right-wing fucking garbage shit, like just awful, rancid fecal matter. However, the reason I'm going to play this is because it's a video, so you don't have to, you can see what Biden's press secretary is saying. It has nothing to do with the Daily Caller. Okay, so this is, I believe, today or yesterday or something.
In terms of actions, Alex, that we have taken, or we're working to take, I should say, from the federal government, we've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging.
Before we keep going, I just want to pause on that part. We're increasing disinformation research and tracking. You know, the best way you can research disinformation is look at your own script. Fucking read your own shit. Hold on. Read your own shit that you're putting out that is complete and utter like fucking falsehoods, disinformation, everything you've said about Cuba or Venezuela or China or fucking Iran. You're a fountain of disinformation. So if you really want to do some disinformation research, then I think you should go look in the mirror. Go talk to some people in your goddamn office. But that's actually not the main reason I wanted to play this clip. Let's go back to this.
From the federal government, we've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation.
Did you catch that? The Biden administration is telling Facebook what to censor. How problematic is that? Even if you wanted to believe that Biden and his administration were the best, most wonderful truth tellers that have ever existed, even if that was your view on reality, would you still, even at that point, want your government controlling social media platforms, telling them what to censor? That is even if this was some sort of superhero, wonderful administration, that is a recipe for fucking dictatorship, propaganda, totalitarianism. The whole idea of social media, of the internet, was that we could get together and speak to each other without the government censoring these things. Now, we knew this was going on for a long time now, obviously. Pressure from the government towards Facebook to crack down on anything that's outside of the Overton window, outside of the acceptable corporate state talking points. We knew it was going on, but it's rare to actually see them say that in a press conference in front of the world. Hey, everybody, just want to let you know we're telling Facebook what to shut up, what to cut off, what to cover up. So that's just wonderful. It's nice that they're just like admitting this shit out front now. They don't even seem to hide their censorship, their crimes. They just kind of go out there and talk about it. And tell it to the world. They even have the person they're signing to help make sure everybody is able to hear their propaganda. That would suck if you're trying to, just help communicate the message, and you're probably just hired to do sign language for the press secretary, and you're unfortunately working to manufacture consent for war. That's a shitty job, but I guess a lot of people have shitty jobs, so that's not surprising. But this is the type of thing that they can say in a press conference. It'll get no coverage other than alternative media. It won't be seen on mainstream media. They won't. If it is, they'll be excited about it. Mainstream media will be excited. Yay, look at the Biden administration is telling Facebook what to censor. This is wonderful. Wonderful. And by the way, I did not mean to make this week censorship week, or like yesterday's episode or 2 days ago was also all about various forms of censorship that are going on, but it just seems to keep bubbling up. They seem to keep showing us their cards in terms of all this censorship. It just gets more and more clear that they are not going to allow speech outside of acceptable corporate state talking points. So I'm getting ready to bring the guest on. Just one more time, all of the donations in the super chat, those all go to people who are struggling or need help right now in these tough times. Same with on Rockfin, same with on Venmo at Lee Camp. All those go to people who need a little help. And if that is you, you can email commoncensored@protonmail.com. That's common censored, by the way, ED at the end. So make sure you throw that in there. And just one last thing, please check out radindiemedia.com, RADINDIE media.com. That's the new site we just launched to help anybody and everybody find cool, radical media as opposed to shit corporate media. And in that vein, I'm excited to have this guest on because she does rad media herself. She does wonderful journalism, but she is multi-talented, and she's part of an upcoming event, the Disability Futures Virtual Festival, which is coming up July 19th. And it'll feature 2 days of art and ideas for some of today's leading disabled artists, writers, performers, and designers. So there's a lot there to talk about. Please welcome Jen Deerenwater.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for being here, Jen.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you here. How you been doing?
Busy.
Yeah.
I keep saying that I'm going to stop working so much and make more room in my schedule for myself. And then something new comes up and it's like, sleep. What's that? I don't need that.
True. Speaking of all I started out talking about all the censorship and everything and how you have to be inside of acceptable, state sponsored talking points in order to be on a lot of these platforms. You've seen your own stuff. Like, every time I talk to you, it seems that someone has, made a deal to work with you and then revoked it once they found out you were going to talk about, or it's always a fight, isn't it?
It is. I sometimes feel like in the quest to have diversity, I get called in to do things, and then people are suddenly surprised that my politics are very far left radical. And I'm always surprised by that. Like, have you read anything I write? Have you listened to me on interviews? Like, I don't really hide my politics.
I guess some of these outlets, if they're big enough, they think, well, once we bring her into the fold, she'll just want to do anything to make us happy or something. I don't know. Bad choice.
I did a Washington Post Live interview on Tuesday, and I mostly played nice, but it was about disability in America. And we were talking a lot about media. And so I mentioned, I was like, I'm going to ask the Washington Post and all legacy media, like, how many of you have deaf or disabled people as journalists? How many are running the newsrooms or radio stations? Like, can you name any? Are any of them BIPOC? So like, even when you're giving me a platform, you better expect I'm going to hold you accountable.
Well, I think they were secretly hoping that by having you on, that meant they didn't have to do those things. They were like, yeah, we had her on once, so that covers it.
That was our disabled Indian. We're done for the next century. We don't need any more of those.
So tell me about this event coming up. Sounds cool.
Yeah, so the Disability Futures Fellow. So it's part of the Disability Futures Fellowship. It's the first fellowship of its kind that is specifically for deaf, disabled, and ill creatives and artists. There are 20 fellows. I'm one of them. And we run the gamut across disabilities, across mediums. One of the fellows is an architect. We have others that do visual art. I'm a journalist and a writer primarily. And so it was really made to help support our careers and to give us the resources that we need, which are so rarely available for us, as well as they've worked with us a lot so that we can make sure we all receive fellowship payments without having to worry about potentially losing like SSDI benefits or our health insurance. Because that's the other thing, when you're disabled, in order to get the health care and the benefits and things you need, the government requires you stay in poverty.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that the other day. It's like you get, you're in poverty getting benefits, and then you get a small amount of money and you like can't take it or something, or you're going to be knocked off your benefits. Right.
And I mean, I could be making, I hesitate to say comfortable because I don't know what a comfortable living is anymore in these days and times.
Yeah. Well, it's only $32 for a cocktail at the bar. So
yeah, exactly. But I could be living a little bit more comfortably, have some savings, things like that, be doing better, but I will never make enough to pay for all the healthcare costs and having a home health aide. So I have to stay within this income restriction, which also means it greatly restricts my growth as an artist, as a journalist. And so Disability Futures Fellowship, they've been working with us to make sure that we get these supports that we need without hopefully making us lose our healthcare or other services. And so it's funded by the Ford and Carnegie W. Mellon Foundations, and it's administered through the United States Artists Organization. And next week, getting to the festival part.
Yeah.
So next week on the 19th and the 20th, some of us fellows, along with some other folks, have done different events and different events online. There were like boxes sent out to some people who registered for the convening, and in those boxes had like tactile art and things in them, including the CD of the song Others Like Me that myself and Marcy Angeles and Tony Enos wrote and produced for this event. We are specifically doing a panel on the 20th, July 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. It's a pre-recorded panel, and that's where we're going to have the world premiere of the song and the music video. And then we all talk about, disability and illness and the digital divide and how those things impact Indigenous artists. Yeah,
I saw something about that. It's one of these things you kind of, I think most people never really think about, but it said that you're doing some of the distribution of the song on CD because many indigenous in this country don't have access to other forms of receiving music.
Right. Yeah. The digital divide is huge for us. I think that I think a lot of people even born and raised in the so-called US don't realize geographically just how large this country is and how much of it is rural.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on than just the coast and that, city, Chicago in the middle of, quote, flyover country.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the country doesn't have telecommunications. And that really is a problem once you hit reservations and tribal villages and, tribal lands. So a lot of our people just don't have access to telecoms on our rural lands, but then even our urban-based people. So 71% of us live in urban and suburban areas, but because so many Native people live in poverty, we don't often have the money to afford internet service and all the latest gadgets and things. So one of the things we're doing for this is distributing free DVDs that will have the music video and the panel on it and the song. And so that's a way to kind of try to help bridge that divide.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, and people wonder why when they drive across the country, the stores still have CD bins for sale. And they're like, they came from New York City, and they're like, why is anyone buying CDs anymore? But,
yeah. I mean,
complicated. And during the pandemic, so many of these classrooms were doing schooling, virtually, and then you had kids. I remember one of the things was one of the photos was a kid sitting outside of Taco Bell trying to get a Wi-Fi signal because they don't have one at home.
Yeah, that's pretty common for a lot of Native youth. They have to go to the parking lot outside of a Starbucks or something to try to get service. A lot of our people will use libraries or community centers or tribal resources. And because of COVID, all of those things got shut down. So that really just further squelched our access to telecoms and basically our access to the whole world. I mean, unemployment, EBT, Medicare, Medicaid, all these things, like you pretty much apply online now. But how do you do that if you don't have internet and you don't have a computer and whatnot?
Yeah, it always hurts your chances of getting a job if they see that you applied from a Taco Bell. It doesn't help. Which of course is a form of discrimination. I wanted to ask you. I mean, you could probably talk for an hour on this subject, but what do you feel are the issues most facing disabled folks in the United States right now?
How many shows can I do with you? Because that could go on for a while. There are just so many. I think, and this is something I just said on Tuesday, is that kind of how I feel as a Native person, where pretty much all the decisions that are made that impact Native people are made by non-Native people. Well, that's the same for deaf and disabled people. All the people making decisions that impact every single aspect of our life, like if we're even able to use the bathroom somewhere, like those decisions are made by the abled. And so
it's funny that conversation's being had in our media, but only about Britney Spears.
And the sad part of that is like what happened to Britney is horrendous, but it happens to disabled people all the time. I mean, in this country, it's still legal under the Buck v. Bell Supreme Court case to sterilize disabled people against our will. And we know that this happens to BIPOC women and people. So if you're deaf or disabled and also BIPOC, I mean, you probably are going to have higher rates of, being forced onto long-acting birth control or such. And so, like, I get frustrated with the conversation around Britney because I'm like, well, yes, it's horrible, but this has been an ongoing problem that, disabled people who are not famous or white or wealthy have been talking about for years, and people just aren't listening.
Yeah.
I really think that kind of how I feel as a Native, I feel as a disabled person that our communities and our people could advance and be doing so much better if the goddamn government just got its fucking boot off our neck. If they let us have the services that we need and deserve, let us live in good housing, have good food, be able to earn a living. It's still legal in this country to pay disabled people sub-minimum wage.
Really?
Yeah, it is still legal to do that. To which I also get frustrated when I look at other movements like Fight for 15. I'm like, that's great, but why aren't you fighting for that for disabled people? Why do people doing prison abolition work leave deaf and disabled people out, even though we have really high rates of suffering police brutality and incarceration? I really just, from the top down, from federal government down to our grassroots movements, the abled are failing us and they are leaving us to die. And just like I believe in tribal sovereignty and self-determination for Native people, I believe in self-determination by disabled people. We are the experts on our lives, and we are the ones who know what we need. So people need to just shut up and listen to us and do what we say.
I like that take. Just shut up and listen to us.
I appreciate doing like shows with you and people like you, because I'm like, oh, I can just fucking cuss all I want.
Yeah.
I can say whatever the hell I want to say. I don't have to censor myself.
Nope. Although I have to watch myself, because I'll go on shows now assuming you can curse, and then they'll be like, whoa, we're on radio or something. Yeah.
That's an FCC fine, damn it.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to make sure I say the name again, because I want people to find it if they're interested. The Disability Futures Virtual Festival. It's July 19th and 20th. And I posted the website in the chat, disabilityfutures.splashthat.com. So I would love people to check it out. What will people get, at the festival? I know you'll be singing there, but there's other events as well.
Yeah. There's there's a bit of a podcast from one of the fellows who wrote a piece. There's, I believe, a meditation event through, it's called Black Power Naps, I believe was the name. There are all kinds of things that you can do during that. Of course, we've made it accessible as possible. There's ASL, there's captioning, all of those things available. But I'll also say that my organization, Crushing Colonialism, is going to host a Facebook watch party. And so in that watch party, we have 5 really big Indigenous prize packages that we're going to raffle off. And so they include, T-shirts, blankets, tote bags, signed books and CDs, all kinds of great stuff from Indigenous artists and creatives. And so that is on the Crushing Colonialism Facebook page. And the tag is at ircc.resist.
Cool. Excellent. While I have you here, I want to ask you about another very important topic that seems to finally have gotten some national attention, is these quote unquote residential schools, which I did a segment on, but I think that is the most ridiculous euphemism that I've ever heard. Residential schools. It should be called, rape and killing centers or something. Just phenomenal. All the, I mean that in a sad way. All the bodies they're finding, and they're talking mainly about them in Canada, but the equivalent shit went on here in the United States as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were. So they're called boarding schools here in the U.S., just to make them sound even more ridiculous than what they actually are. But we had, I want to say there were 365 boarding schools in the so-called U.S., and there were 150-ish in Canada. And people talk about these issues like, oh, this happened generations ago. And one, it still matters. It doesn't matter if it's generations ago. And 2, this isn't generations ago. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1990. The last of the majority of the boarding schools in this country closed in the 1980s and 1990s. We have boarding and residential school survivors that are still alive.
And for those who've never heard of these, I just want to be clear. This is the place where places where native children were largely kidnapped or pressured. The family is pressured to turn over their kids, and then they're supposed to be, turned into culturally acceptable American or Canadian children, which of course is a form of cultural genocide. And even the Canadian governmental report that came out in 2015 called it cultural genocide. So they're no longer denying that aspect. They may be denying other aspects, such as the sheer number of kids that were killed in some form or another.
I mean, the things that happened at those schools were horrendous. I mean, just constant sexual, physical abuse, mental, emotional abuse. I mean, our children were put through horrific things. Some of them were murdered. Some died from illnesses or starvation. Many tried to escape. And parents in tribal nations had no choice. You either sent your kids or you got arrested. And it wasn't in this country, in the so-called US, until 1978, I believe, when the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed. We had to have policy because so many Native children have been stolen and are still being stolen from us now through other means of state and Christian violence. But it wasn't until 1978 that there was finally a law in place that allowed Native people and communities to say, we're not going to send our kids to these schools anymore. I was born in 79. I mean, this is stuff that's happening within my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it was purposeful genocide. There's no doubt on that. I mean, the man who started the first boarding school here in this country is Richard Henry Pratt. He's the man behind the term and the policy, kill the Indian, save the man. He started the first boarding school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I've been there. That place is horrendous. There's a guard shack. What school needs a guard shack? There's a cemetery on the side of the road where there are graves marked as unknown. What kind of school needs a cemetery?
Yeah.
And to add insult to injury, the site of the boarding school, the Carlisle boarding school, is now the site of the Army College of War, where I had to go through a background check before they would let me go onto the campus. Like, how fucked is that you made Native children come here, including children from my tribe, and now I have to go through your fucking background check to come onto this land? Like,
yeah, and I read that they had meant to. They had meant to cover up basically the unmarked grave of so many dead children, and so it was at the back of the Army school, but then they ended up shifting the entire area, and the entrance is now the back. So now basically you go in the front and there's a massive grave of children right as you're entering.
Yeah. And who knows how many children died that as a result of these schools, but didn't die at the schools. I've read stories of once the schools realized children were going to die, they sent them home because they didn't want them dying at their schools.
Yeah. And the other thing is just not a surprise, what a catastrophic job our mainstream media has done on this. Besides just ignoring it, I'd say that's protocol number one. But when I was looking these things up, I found one as recent as 2007 when NPR did a story on how amazing the Carlisle school was for creating football players, and that they talked about Pratt like he was a hero for football who had gone, bravely gone and scouted, quote unquote, Native Americans to be on the football team, and how great the team became, and not a mention of any kind of death or kidnapping or cultural genocide.
Yeah, I imagine they were probably speaking about Jim Thorpe, who was a very famous Native athlete who was at the Carlisle school. I think he was in the Olympics at one point. And so a lot of Native community, we do kind of hold Thorpe up as a hero of sorts. But, something that I recently learned about him is that there is a town in Pennsylvania called Thorpe, and it's named after him. And his remains are there against the will of his nation. Like, he was brought there and put there as basically kind of a marketing device for the town. excuse me, and his tribe can't get his remains back. The town won't give him up, so he
Well,
can't properly leave to rest.
that's certainly in line with Carlisle, because
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
people are still trying to get remains back from that school.
Yeah.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything I'm missing that I should be asking about, or anything, any websites we should give out?
Go to crushingcolonialism.org. Crushing Colonialism is an organization that I founded, and we work to uplift the voices of indigenous multimedia makers. You can also learn more about me and the work I do at jdeerenwater.com. And don't forget to go register for Disability Futures Disability Futures Festival, and for Crushing Colonialism's Facebook watch party.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Talk to you soon.
All righty. Bye.
Bye. That was Jen Deerenwater. Thank you so much for attending and joining us for that. I've got one more story here I want to go over with you about Cuba. But if you missed any of those websites and you want to get them, I put them in the comment section, including the website for the Disability Futures Virtual Festival coming up. But I'm sure you could also just Google it and probably find it pretty easily. But that is in the comment section if you want to find it. Okay, so you for the most part, you know what's going on in Cuba. There's protests in Cuba. Obviously, there's protests in most countries at some point. I mean, name a country where the citizens are completely happy with their government all the time. But what's different about it when it happens in Cuba is that our mainstream media jizzes themselves and runs around going, "Woo-hoo, there's protests in Cuba," and they plaster it all over CNN or what have you. And something else that has been quite prevalent in many of the Twitter feeds, the Twitter sharing about the protests in Cuba, has been people showing images that are not in Cuba and saying, "Look at the protests in Cuba." And it's, an image of a bunch of people marching. And it turns out that it's in Buenos Aires or it's in Florida. And yes, those people are marching to try and create regime change in Cuba. They're just not in Cuba. They're not current Cuban citizens. So, and yet people are passing this off as, "Look at what's going on in Cuba. Oh my God." And, some people have been having fun with how ridiculous it's been. But here's something else that I wanted to bring to your attention that you will not see on your mainstream media while they're showing you protests in Cuba, which, by the way, are largely caused by our sanctions on Cuba, which have crushed their economy, causes a lot of people to suffer. And then guess what? Protests end up happening. And that's why the United States government does it. They crush people with economic war to try and cause protests, to try and cause regime change. Anyway, here's what you will not see on your mainstream media. It was put out by Code Pink, the great anti-war group. And this is a pro-revolution, meaning the initial revolution in Cuba that threw off the basically stranglehold of the United States around their necks, and put Fidel Castro into power, followed by Raul Castro, and now they have another president. But this is people in Cuba supporting the Cuban government, supporting that revolution, and opposed to U.S. imperialism, U.S. regime change efforts. And you will not see this in your mainstream media. So funny how they seem so eager to show you the other videos of protests against the government And they're not going to show the ones that are for the government in support of the Cuban Revolution, in which they threw America off their backs. The tweet from Code Pink says, "You won't see this in the Western media, wonder why." And then the tweet from the news service that put up the video says, "Residents in the town of Palma Soriano, Cuba, have mobilized in defense of the revolution and against U.S. intervention." And yeah, it's funny. See, I don't know. Anderson Cooper must just not have found that clip. I don't know. I don't know who's doing his research. I guess Fox News and MSNBC just must have missed that video for some odd reason. You know, maybe the researcher just got replaced with like an intern who kind of sucks. And they for some odd reason they haven't played that video. They've only played the protest against the government. But of course, also the United States acts like a protest in Cuba means the whole island is going to sink into the ocean and collapse into a fiery ball, whereas a protest in so many other countries that are going on right now, like Colombia, like Brazil, like the United States, they act like those are nothing. Those are meaningless protests. I mean, name a day of the week in the United States where there's not a protest against a pipeline, against the Biden administration, against Trump, against any of these things, Black Lives Matter. All of these protests are going on regularly. And most of the time, our mainstream media doesn't see fit to cover them. Every once in a while, things get to like a tipping point where the mainstream media feels like they have to cover it, or else they look kind of stupid. So they covered Black Lives Matter. They also covered Black Lives Matter more when Trump was in office because it was a good kind of anti-Trump technique to cover that. But now that Biden's in office, they have no use or no care for protests that are going on in the United States. Although then you see Fox News do the reverse, right? Under Trump, they don't care about the protests, or they call Black Lives Matter some riotous, fucking anarchists want to hurt us kind of shit. And then once Biden gets in office, all of a sudden, every protest that happens in the United States, Fox News has cameras there, and they're going, look, people don't like Biden. Because they're all garbage. They're all pieces of shit. And you got to understand, the human beings that work there are pieces of shit, and you should not be watching any of those networks. And anyway, that is another story I wanted to bring you. So all of that, and you know, I don't mean for this to be a promotion for Rad Indie Media, but why not? Why not make it a promotion for Rad Indie Media, which we've just created? Sorry, it went down a little last night due to the volume of people going to Rad Indie Media, which is pretty fucking awesome, I guess. Although I hate to see the site crash, but yeah, we needed to increase the amount of bandwidth that we had paid for, and we didn't realize that because we used up a month's worth of bandwidth in like 5 days, and we hadn't realized that. But so yeah, it's now back up. radindiemedia.com, RAD like radical, rad indie, INDIE like independent, radindiemedia.com. I hope you'll check it every single day. One last time, that is the festival Jen Deerenwater will be at is Disability Futures Virtual Festival. There's a new Redacted tonight that came out today. My interview with Jill Stein about Julian Assange. I think you should really catch that. That will be up at Rad Indie Media. It's also up or will be soon on my website, leecamp.com. And a new Redacted tonight tomorrow. I think I got it all out there. All the donations in the Super Chat, on Venmo, at Lee Camp, or on Rockfin, all of those go to people who are struggling, who need a little help. That's where that money goes. There is one site where you can go to support my work. That's liberapay.com/Lee Camp, LIBERAPAY.com/Lee Camp. Okay, guys, keep fighting.